Hi, this is a short demo of the current progress of my VR game. I've already shown some progress on this channel in the past, and if you want to see that, I'll link it below. Today I'll go over the new additions to the game, some of the changes I've made to both the game mechanics as well as the overall plan for the project, and lastly, what I plan to work on in the future. A couple of months ago, I posted a quick demo with no narration or sound of any kind. I was mainly using that as a record for myself as well as a means to show friends and family what I've been working on. In that video were two weapons with some basic implementation for loading and firing bullets. That demo is extremely early on, even with the little progress that I've made so far, but the interaction framework I'm using made things relatively easy to put together, though that isn't to say that I've not had issues with it as well. For this demo, I'm going to go over the things that I've done chronologically, and at the end I'll get to my future plans. First, I removed the bolt action model I had before and replaced it with this new M1911. I still have the first bolt action prefab, but after considering the visual style I wanted for the game, it was clear I needed new models. The M4 carried over because of this, and in fact, the 1911 is from the same asset pack as well as many of the other models I may or may not implement later on. The 1911, like the M4, takes its own magazine with its own rounds, though until today, as of this recording, both actually fired the same bullet as far as Unity is concerned, but I'll get to that in a bit. The magazine holds 7 rounds and an additional round held in the chamber. This behavior for the magazine plus the chamber is also on the M4 as well. After experimenting with the zombie AI from Epicenter, I discovered that mostly thanks to the work put into it by myself and a classmate at the time, the AI was working mostly out of the box with little adjustment to the new VR scene. For example, in Epicenter, when a zombie spotted the player, a bit more was happening behind the scenes than you may first expect. First, the distance between the zombie's position and the player is checked. If the player is within a certain radius of the zombie, a ray is cast from the zombie's torso to the player's torso. If nothing stops the ray cast and the ray is within a certain field of view of the zombie, then the finite state machine on the zombie switches over to the chase state and the zombie begins moving towards the player's position. Because of how this is implemented, the only change I needed to make for it to work in the VR demo scene was to change out the player position variable on the zombie controller to match the VR player rig as opposed to the first person camera rig from Epicenter. After that change was made, all of the zombie AI behavior began to work as expected, including behaviors I hadn't even thought about for the project, such as when shot, if the zombie is close enough to the player, no matter what direction the zombie is facing, it will immediately move towards the player that shot at it. With that done, I created a stripped-down version of the zombie spawn manager from Epicenter, specifically for the demo scene. As you can see, it just continuously spawns new zombies to shoot as you kill them. Later on, when the actual scene is put together for gameplay tests, I'll re-implement the original zombie spawn manager and make any necessary changes. Next up in Epicenter, it was simpler due to time constraints to just use raycasts for our bullets. Since the range of the engagements was typically less than 20 meters, this was never an issue gameplay-wise, but it made creating some effects more challenging. For instance, when a dead zombie was shot, if we wanted to move the zombie in reaction to that, it would need to be done in code on the raycast. But now, with the physics projectile-based system in the VR version, interactions like that are handled by the Unity physics engine automatically. I can still add effects like explosive rounds that add additional knockback to the zombies, for instance, but for basic ballistic collisions, all the work is done by Unity. For that to work, however, the items, weapons, enemies, and even the projectiles need to have the correct mass, velocity, etc. in order for the physics engine to produce realistic results. I'll touch on it more later, but this is how I'm achieving the ballistics in this demo. A simple addition to the scene is the item spawners. They use the VR interaction framework to handle the interaction events, but the code to spawn the items was just a few lines. When it comes to sound, Epicenter focused on high fidelity, realistic sound, and although we couldn't implement any mechanics like path traced audio, we did our best to match tone, quality, ambience, etc. to give the game a cohesive and atmospheric sound. For this demo, the only sounds ported over so far are the firing sounds for the M4 and 1911. I'm still working on that as my library of firearm sounds is limited, as is my knowledge of audio engineering, but hopefully I can get them sounding punchy, realistic, and just fun in general. As for the other sounds, like weapon manipulation, I have the capability to record my own audio, but as I said, that may take more time since not only would I need to understand a bit more about recording and mixing audio, but I would need to test my current recording equipment for quality. If it's not up to my standards, then I may need to use placeholders until I can get something more suited for what I'm trying to do. Moving away from sound, something that was handled automatically in Epicenter was the reloading, slide stop, and attachments. Pressing R on the keyboard would play an animation, some sound, and then you'd magically have more ammo to shoot. In VR, there is more opportunity to easily introduce the more complex interactions with items, including reloading a gun, and that's what I've tried to accomplish here. As you can see, after emptying the magazine, the slide locks back and you have a few options. After inserting a loaded magazine, the slide can be brought forward manually, or you can simply release the slide stop lever. Both actions result in the same outcome, a new round in the chamber ready to fire. Removing a magazine also has two options. You can physically pull the magazine out on weapons that support it, or you can press the magazine eject button to drop it automatically. For attachments, in Epicenter, the only attachment available was the suppressor. This could be placed on any weapon to mitigate the sound until the durability bar dropped to 0. Attaching the suppressor was done by pressing a single key and nothing else. For VR, once again, the ability to physically pick up objects allows me to better implement such a feature as attachments. So, while suppressors are currently not implemented, optics are. Here are two examples. The first is the iron sight that came with this model that I've converted into an attachment. In the last demo, this was simply attached to the M4 and you couldn't interact with it whatsoever. Now, bringing it close to the rail, the sight moves to the attachment point. Taking it off is just as easy. Second is this combination red dot sight with magnified optic. It can be attached in the same way as the iron sight and has its own offsets to allow it to sit in the correct position. That brings me to the next addition, which is the implementation of red dots and magnified optics in the first place. The red dot on top uses a shader applied to a 2D plane that when viewed from the front renders the dot texture at a range of about 100 meters away from the optic. This behavior is true to life, as with real reflex sights, the dot does not stay perfectly in the same place as you move your perspective. Having the dot render this way in the shader produces the same effect. For the magnified scope, the implementation is a bit simpler, though I do intend to find a better solution later on. It's using a camera in front of the optic with a 10-degree field of view. The output of that camera is fed to a render texture, which is applied to the cylinder inside the optic housing. The crosshair is just another texture in front of the image. The resolution of the scope's image as well as the zoom level are all adjustable, and that's something I'll look into improving later on. Going back to sounds for a bit, audio for the weapons is now 3D as well. For Epicenter, this was not the case, since weapons never moved relative to the player, there was no need to make their audio sources use spatial sound. Something that turned out relatively easy to do, but was never explored for Epicenter, is dismemberment for the zombies when killed. Because the projectiles are physics-based, on impact they apply a force to the zombies, and if that zombie dies on that frame, the limb hit with the projectile will test whether or not the force applied is higher than some threshold. If this is true, the limb is detached. Also, limb-based damage is implemented currently, and arbitrary values were picked for each. Right now, headshots, regardless of the weapon used, will kill instantly, body shots will do normal damage, and arm or leg shots will deal 70% damage. I'll touch on it later, but I'm currently working on a system to handle damage applied to zombies that would utilize the kinetic energy of the collisions, rather than arbitrary values in code. This way, not only would bullets deal damage to the zombies, but so would fall damage, or a rock, or an empty magazine if thrown hard enough. Another major addition is the RGD5 frag grenade. I based it on the real-life counterpart, including the mass and fuse timer. Again, more on the physics side of that later, but the grenade can have its pin pulled to arm it, put back in to disarm it, and even cooked if you release the lever early. Two other interesting behaviors implemented are the ability to pull the pin without holding the grenade, and the ability to shoot the grenade to detonate it instantly. The purpose for these behaviors is the intention to put the grenades on some of the military zombies, so you have the option to shoot the grenades on their chests, killing them and the other zombies around, sniper elite style. Something else I hadn't shown in the first demo, but was actually already handled by the VR interaction framework I'm using, is climbing. Here's a short clip of that where you can see me climbing up on top of these green blocks. Lastly, I want to circle back and explain the physics behavior that I was putting off. Each bullet type in the demo, as well as every item, and even the zombies, are using realistic values for their masses, drag, etc. This will let me more easily implement kinetic energy-based damage, but will also be useful for interactions like throwing objects. For the M4, for instance, the mass of the rifle is set at 3.01 kilograms, and the empty magazine is about 139 grams. Each 5.56 by 45 NATO cartridge is set to a mass of about 12 grams. With these values and the code on the M4, when you insert a fully loaded magazine into the M4, the weight updates to about 3.5 kilograms. Doing this may seem a bit much at first, but as easy as it was to implement, I see no issue in using it. When the 5.56 by 45 NATO round is fired, a projectile with a mass of 4 grams is spawned at the muzzle, and given the impulse force required to accelerate it to a speed of about 950 meters per second. The 1911 is handled the same way, but with different values for masses and velocities for each part. So that's everything I've gotten so far. It may not seem like much for the few months I've had since the last video, but I just finished my last semester at university, which was interfering with my ability to work on the project. But now that I'm done, I've had the time to get back into Unity and work on the game. The progress you've seen thus far is the result of about 30 hours of work over the past week, and knowing that, I think it's pretty good. Currently, I'm ironing out bugs and focusing on getting the item interactions solid, as well as the main gameplay mechanics like shooting zombies. I want to improve things like the inventory system for the player, the gameplay managers from Epicenter, etc. In the future, I have plans for things like locomotion options, more firearm types, more attachments, and perhaps even local asymmetric multiplayer. A lot of this future planning hinges on whether or not there's interest for the project. Right now, I'm primarily wanting to emulate and improve the original Epicenter experience in VR, and no matter what, I do plan to finish what will essentially be Epicenter VR. As for anything beyond that, it will depend on the interest of others. I hope you enjoyed this demo, and if you're interested in the project, drop a subscription and wait for the next update video. As I get playable demos built, I'll post them somewhere, whether that be itch.io or this YouTube channel. So if you don't want to miss that, stick around. Also, if you're definitely interested in what I'm doing and you want to play this game when it's done, comment that and let me know. I am genuinely interested in what you think, and it'll help me figure out what to do with the project in the future.